All right, league members, it is time for the week 3 edition of the Power Rankings. I think this is going to be a great episode. We've got some excellent stuff coming for you. We're going to do a little bit of a shorter video today just because we don't need to do, I think, long analysis every single week of these teams. So the format for this one is going to be one take, and we're just going to go through the Power Rankings, and I'm just going to say the one storyline I think from each team that is most interesting to me, and we'll kind of just do it that way. So without further ado, we're going to get right into it, and we're going to go with number 14. This is no surprise, back-to-back. This season has been a disaster, 0-3, lowest scoring team in the league. The biggest storyline from this team to me is this the end of Travis Kelce as an elite fantasy or just in general NFL tight end? He's 24th in tight end scoring this year, averaging 3.7 points per game. If this is the end of Travis Kelce, we have truly seen the end of one of the greatest careers of all time, especially in fantasy. How many years in a row has it been that he's been the number one tight end? I think maybe this was the first year where people were thinking Laporta might be better than Kelce, but you know, for 8 to 10 years, it seems like Kelce has been the bona fide set it and forget it number one tight end in fantasy. Now you don't even know if you can start Travis Kelce. So that's a number one storyline from your team. JoJo, obviously your season is almost certainly in the toilet. You're playing me this week. It looks like it's going to be, barring a miracle, 0-4 for you. Moving on to the number 13 team, we have the OKC Mariners. Not as you predicted, the last place team. I think you were on the table for last place, but Chase did seem to get somewhat back on track. The storyline that is intriguing to me for this team is just the lack of running back depth. Right now, you're pegged to start Emmanuel Wilson. That's just a desperation move. You had Kenneth Walker and Tony Pollard, and really nothing behind that. You really went heavy on receivers. The receivers have been okay, but not great. Chase, other than that explosion last week, hasn't been particularly fantastic. Olave kind of struggled at times to get going. So, and obviously Terry McLaurin before last night's game was absolutely nowhere to be found. So, definitely a lost season for this OKC Mariners team. I don't really see any way back. Your matchup with AJ is going to determine a lot. If AJ can slide by, he's going to be in great shape. If AJ doesn't win that one, he's going to be potentially in a lot of trouble. Moving on to the number 12 team, the most shocking thing about this season to me so far, the herd mentality coming in at number 12. Going from number 1 to number 12 in 3 weeks is truly stunning. The number one storyline for this team, is the curse real? Is the curse of the number one draft pick, number one power rankings team a real thing? Nothing has gone right for this team. Brandon Ayuk has been a complete disappointment. Wide receiver 64 on the year, Brandon Ayuk. He has been awful, just literally from an NFL standpoint. Several important drops this season. He has just not been in sync at all. And then you have to trade Justin Jefferson away. What looked like one of the strongest receiving corps in the league turned out to be pretty weak. And then, of course, you add in the fact that you have an injury to Pacheco and an indirect injury with Jalen Waddle now. It's been an awful season. So this could mean that the curse is real. It happened to Sean last year. It's happening to you right now, potentially. In a must-win matchup with Pablo, if Pablo beats you and gets back to 2-2, your season is basically over. Speaking of Pablo coming in at number 11, getting his first win of the year last week against JoJo. The Standing on Business Tour finally has something to stand on. What is the biggest storyline? Well, I mean, I've mentioned it every week, and I'm going to mention it again. How can your receivers be this bad? Michael Pittman is currently wide receiver 74 on the year. Calvin Ridley is currently your best wide receiver at wide receiver 27 on the year, so a fringe wide receiver 2. And George Pickens is currently wide receiver 49. So you don't have a single wide receiver in the top 25, and on your bench it doesn't get better with Cortland Sutton at wide receiver 58 and Gabe Davis at wide receiver 68. So this has just been an awful situation for your receiving core. It really limits your team's upside. You actually have good running backs, but terrible receivers. Michael Pittman looking like one of the busts of the year. Anthony Richardson can't complete a pass. So really, really bad for you. If you beat Nibs this week, you've got some side of chance. I mean, I would honestly look at trading Breece Hall potentially for some receivers. If you can get 2 good receivers for Breece, maybe that's something to look into. All right, moving on to number 10. I hate to do it, but I have to do this. CTESPN. Now, he was 10 last week. I didn't rank him down after losing to me, but the storyline on the season is just the horrendous injuries that have happened to this team. Kupp going on injured reserve, Deebo Samuel and Keenan Allen all injured. Saquon Barkley has been fantastic, but you have nothing else going on for your team right now. You haven't broken 90 in a couple weeks. I just cannot, with your roster in this current state. The fact that you had an incredible 33-point performance from Barkley and still didn't break 90, that just tells me that your roster doesn't have enough depth right now. You have to get healthy. If you don't win this week against Jake, you could spiral and potentially be looking at a 4 or 5 game losing streak until your lineup gets fixed, which is going to be very unfortunate. Really need Deebo to come back for sure within the next couple weeks. All right, moving on to the number 9 team, Dirty Mike and the boys, Brennan Costello. What? Brennan's number 9 in the power rankings, even though he's 2-1. Well, unfortunately for Brennan, there's still a lot of issues with Brennan's team. I don't like this team from a roster standpoint at all. You've got 2 Chicago Bear running backs on your roster, and neither one of them looks like the right Chicago Bears running back to have, remarkably enough. DeAndre Swift, another big candidate for one of the all-time busts on the season. You're okay with Jahmyr Gibbs. Patrick Mahomes hasn't produced that well fantasy-wise. I think the big storyline is, how do you get the easiest schedule every single year? That's what we want to know right now. Currently the 4th easiest schedule in fantasy. You've scraped by. You've got a Sean Bates team that was looking like a steamroller for the first 2 weeks, comes and falls flat on his face against you last week to hand you that victory where it looked like you were really on the ropes. So, credit to you for the good start, but I'm not sold on this team at 2-1. It's the lowest ranked 2-1 team in terms of the standings right now. It just hasn't looked great, and Gabo is looking like a very tough matchup for you this week, indeed. Moving on to the number 8 team, we have Nate Solly Ketchby. He saved his season last week with the upset victory over Cam. There's a lot of things to like about this team. I think the biggest storyline for this team right now is, can you get something out of your flex? Can one of your bench players, you got some promising bench players come out, can Rico Dowdle or Carson Steele, can one of those 2 guys step up and give you some value until Puka Nacua comes back? When Nacua comes back, especially if he comes back before Cooper Kupp, which with Cooper Kupp you never know, you really like the depth of the team and the ability to roll out solid players at every position. Until that happens, we're just not sure. So the biggest storyline is going to be, can you manage that flex and let Jonathan Taylor, Kyler Murray, and James Conner kind of cook for you at the top of your lineup until that happens? That's going to be the number 1 key to success for Nate Solly. He's got a very winnable game against a banged-up Leicester squad. If A.J. Brown doesn't come back, we'll get to Leicester's team in a moment. Leicester's team is not looking super solid right now, so we'll have to wait and see with that one. Coming in at number 7, we have the Consolation King, Sean Bates, a team I was high on in the preseason, but man, last week was a stinker. You had Brennan dead to rights. Brennan didn't have a good week at all, and your team just completely fell flat on its face. The number 1 storyline, I think, with this team, I mean, I could talk about Mark Andrews. I think this is a team that has more interesting storylines than any team. I've got a couple for you. Rachaad White, I feel like you should almost be rooting against Rachaad White, and the reason is Bucky Irving has looked so good when he's gotten into the game. I think you should almost be hoping that White continues to struggle and he gets benched, because I think if you're able to plug in Bucky Irving to your RB2 spot with some playing time, I think Bucky Irving suddenly becomes a really interesting player in a good offense. I think the thing that's holding your team back right now, though, is CeeDee Lamb at wide receiver 19 on the year so far. You just need him to be a top 5 guy for your team to really be viable. You just cannot have CeeDee Lamb with a mediocre season. Now, the good news for you is Lamb got out to a slow start last year and then exploded down the stretch. You have to be hoping for that to happen again for you. If Lamb can start producing at a top 5 level, I think your team is fine. And then obviously Mark Andrews, just shocking how bad he's been, not even getting on the field. 1 target, 0 catches last week. It's already looking like it's basically over for his season, and he was a high draft pick for you. All right, moving on to number 6. It's playoff tier. Lester, he wants me to say that he's not a playoff team. Well, he's technically ranked within the playoffs because he had a strong week last week. But the honeymoon period with Zach Charbonnet looks like it's wearing off. Biggest storyline of this team right now is Roschon Johnson going to be the answer to your prayers at the flex position? Right now, your depth is very tenuous with A.J. Brown out. Amari Cooper did kind of go off last week, but Amari Cooper and DJ Moore have both had a lot of bad weeks when you take that in stock. So in order to elevate your team's stock, you need Roschon Johnson to be really good, and we will have to be monitoring Roschon. He's got the Rams. The Rams' run defense looked very okay last week. It wasn't spectacular. So I think Roschon, if he's going to do it, he's got to do it in that matchup. That's a must-win game for the Bears. Just sort of like you really need to beat Nate Solly. If you let Nate Solly back into this contest at 2-2 and you're also at 2-2, it feels like I'm picking Nate Solly over you in terms of quality of the roster at this point in the season, Lester. So really need to get something going for you. All right, coming in at number 5, this will be a controversial ranking, but I'm sticking to my guns with Cam Lautenschlager at number 5. Now, this is a make-or-break week for Boston Monroe right now, who we'll talk about in just a sec. His meteoric rise, you are basically the thing that is stopping him from becoming an extremely dangerous team. You have to get a win this week against Boston Monroe. With your team, I think the big storyline is DK Metcalf looks like a legit wide receiver 1 this year. He's performed fantastic. He gets targets in the end zone. He's made a couple of really big plays, but I don't necessarily think he's big play dependent. I think he can have some volume in the offense. They're going to need to throw, I think, a lot against Detroit. His performance has really buoyed your team. My concern, obviously, is Anthony Richardson. Now, there's a point where a running quarterback can get away with struggling in the passing game, but he has been so bad throwing the football the first 3 weeks that it's starting to look like he might not be a viable starting quarterback. When you look at your bench, Caleb Williams hasn't exactly looked fantastic. He's quarterback 28 on the year, averaging just 10.5 fantasy points per game. Holy cow, that is not very good. So your quarterback situation is tenuous. I love the rest of your roster. James Cook has been fantastic. I think Bijan will get better. I think he's just really a high floor player and has tremendous upside as well. Dobbins, you expect him to tick down a little bit, but honestly, I think that you have enough depth on this roster. If Richardson can just get something going, if he can just complete 55% of his passes, you feel like you're in great shape with him, but that's going to be a big thing for your season. All right, moving on to number 4. We don't have to look far in this matchup. Boston Monroe, Cam Lautenschlager, that's the game of the week. Boston, what is the main storyline with this team? Resilience, just has overcome the loss of Christian McCaffrey, and now he's got Justin Jefferson on his team. So with Justin Jefferson and Chris Godwin, he's got the wide receiver 3 and wide receiver 4 on his roster. He's also got Brock Bowers, who's been fantastic, sneaky good player, tight end 2 on the season, and Josh Allen's carried this team. I think the main storyline is, can Boston just keep things together? Christian McCaffrey, when is he going to come back? We don't know. We've been hearing week 6 he could come back. We've been hearing week 10 he's going to Germany to see a specialist. Will we see him at all? Nobody knows. The thing about it is, Boston, it hasn't seemed to matter yet so far for him. He's been able to scrap and claw to get some production. Helps when Josh Allen's averaging 24 points per game at the quarterback position. Number 3. Well, this is a guy that had me getting clowned in my power rankings, but my instincts were right. Gobble McGregor at number 3 has to be him. He's averaging 130 points the last 2 weeks. Just fantastic production. And I mean, you look at the roster up and down. Malik Neighbors is wide receiver 1 right now in fantasy football. He's just been an electric, fun watch. Marvin Harrison Jr. is now risen to number 9 after back-to-back really strong performances. Everyone was sounding the panic button on Harrison. I wasn't really sounding the panic button. And then Juwan Jennings, the pickup of the season so far. What an incredible performance. As long as Deebo Samuel and George Kittle are missing from the offense, Juwan Jennings, he arguably is the number 1 wide receiver on the 49ers right now. I don't think that's crazy given how bad Ayuk has played. Number 1 storyline for me, the youth movement, it worked. Risk equals reward, and McGregor's team looking absolutely fantastic right now. I think he is in for a playoff berth this year unless things go very, very wrong. Number 2 on the power rankings, Hustlers, a team that was not in my preseason top 6, but I was wrong, and I'll admit it. The storyline for this team, to me, the number 1 interesting thing is if T. Higgins, who had a decent slow start, but at least had some looks in the offense. If T. Higgins can truly be a wide receiver 2 for this team, what an incredible boost that would be. That would give you 2 legit RB1s, a legit wide receiver 1 in Amon-Ra, a legit guy at wide receiver 2 in T. Higgins, George Kittle when he's healthy as a number 1 tight end. You would arguably be one of the deepest teams. I think you're top 3 already in terms of depth on the roster for your squad right now. Chris, I doubted you. It looks like you got a great chance to go to 4-0. You've got Bates, who's looking vulnerable right now. Bates is going to be desperate, but I just don't think it's going to be enough. I think you've got him this week with several favorable matchups. I look at Amon-Ra going to be in a high-scoring game, I think, against Seattle, so that's a good matchup. I like Odunze against a banged-up Rams secondary. You saw Juwan Jennings go off. That could be Odunze very easily. It looks like that connection got going. I like your team, Chris. I think my biggest question with your team was Aaron Jones, and he's looked fantastic. Other than that, it's been coming up Chris all year. Number 1, obviously has to be me. I mean, there's just no question. 3-0 on the year, averaging over 130 points per game so far this year. The storyline, I think, the thing that I think is my biggest storyline personally is Jaden Daniels. Boy, he looks fantastic. Could this guy be a league winner for me? It's very possible, in my opinion, that he becomes sort of this elite rushing upside with some flashes in the passing game type of player. He's dangerous at the goal line. I think he has 3 rushing touchdowns on the year already, which is just incredible to have that. Yeah, he's got 3 rushing touchdowns and 2 passing touchdowns, and he's also leading the NFL in completion percentage. He was able to push the ball downfield last week, which is something we haven't seen. I love Jaden Daniels. I love what he's brought to my team. Sort of a victim of my own success of these power rankings. It's not that interesting when I have to rank myself number 1 every week, but hey, first world problems, if there ever were any. That's going to wrap it up, folks. I hope you enjoy the shorter, more to the point format. We may be looking at this. It's not going to be long now before I release my highly anticipated mid-season recap. That's going to be coming up in just a couple of weeks now, where we analyze biggest top 5 storylines, top 5 best and top 5 worst draft picks, things of that nature. We're going to be going over all of that in just a couple weeks, guys. No bonus content this week, but stay tuned. We're going to have plenty of content with these power rankings coming for you, and I'm very excited to get that going. So I will see you guys coming up next week.